Thank you, Presiding Officer. The term lobbying can, for some people at least, conjure up images of dubious characters loitering in the corridors of power, attempting to gain unfair advantage over the ordinary citizen. And indeed, the origins of the term are from the Willard Hotel in Washington, where Ulysses S. Grant, President of the United States, who used to retire for his brandy and cigars in the evening, would be accosted in the lobby of the hotel by people seeking to influence public policy. So it was face-to-face in the original times. No telephones in 1820, it would be fair to say. The committee has, however, had a long-term view that modern lobbying is a positive and necessary part of any democracy that equips decision-makers with valuable information and, more importantly, allows individuals, firms, organisations to engage with and influence policymakers as they've every right to do. What this bill aims to do is to bring a perfectly legitimate activity out into the open. If everyone can see who's contributed to the decision-making process, then those decisions should have greater legitimacy and be more representative, and it ought to be made easier to hold account decision-makers. Outcomes which I think are broadly supported across the Parliament. But equally, we're aware of the danger of creating barriers or the appearance of barriers for smaller organisations and individuals whom we wish to see engaging with Parliament. And vitally, we must leave MSPs and our constituents able to interact with each other on matters of local interest. Now, the committee's work does go back in this area some time, as the Minister outlined. Following Neil Findlay MSP's proposal for a Members' Bill in 2013, the committee held the inquiry looking into the question of whether there needed to be more information available to the public about who lobbies the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government. Our report was produced in February 2013 and set out a series of proposals which, to a very large extent, have informed the Government's bill that's before us today. Nevertheless, in the light of evidence we had during our Stage 1 inquiry, we think there are issues to consider further. The bill, as currently drafted, will only require lobbyists to register if they have face-to-face meetings with MSPs and ministers. I will.
Thank you for taking the intervention. Warren Buffett once said that contribution, particularly of those in public service, requires integrity, intellect and energy, and without the first one, the other two are useless. I think you would agree that we should seek to retain all of these, and the evidence to date, certainly my evidence to date, is that these characteristics are endemic in this Parliament. I am therefore concerned, even sure, that the consequence of the bill may, in the long run, be the very opposite of that intended, and that these characteristics may well be damaged. Would the member accept that, should the bill go ahead, that the committee will ensure there will be no exceptions proposed for different types of lobbyists?
Stevenson?
Well, the committee's view is that in seeking to differentiate between lobbyists who are paid, who lobby as part of their paid activity, and those individuals and organisations that are voluntary and where there is no financial or other similar reward to people, we think that distinction is a good one. The member referred to integrity, intellect and energy. I suspect, and I cannot speak for the committee because we did not discuss it in quite those terms, but I suspect that the committee would see a register of lobbyists and showing light into what goes on in lobbying as an excellent example for us all to demonstrate those three attributes of integrity, intellect and energy. Now, Presiding Officer, we understand that the definition to which I've just been referring is designed to capture most meaningful interactions, and a line was drawn in an effort to produce a light-touch regime. Nevertheless, thinking about this since our original report, we felt this approach may be too narrow and create the impression of there being options open to organisations wishing to avoid scrutiny. We therefore have recommended that consideration be given to widening the definition of registrable lobbying to include all forms of communication. We've not looked directly at the potential effects of this and hence asked the Government to do that. In practice, my personal experience, and I stress it is my personal experience, doesn't suggest that an extension of the definition the way we suggest would significantly increase the number of registrants. My personal reflection is that we must test to see whether it would inhibit communication between MSPs and constituents. That's one of the essential tests. We mustn't overburden organisations, most particularly small organisations pursuing legitimate campaigns, and create an administrative headache for them or for Parliament. The former are the more important. During the bill's progress, we will not, of course, be deciding what the contents of the proposed register would be. That is something which Parliament will come to after the passage of the bill. However, at this stage, it's worth saying that the committee are not suggesting that the details of every phone call, email should appear in the register, merely that the fact there have been such communications and what their purpose has been. This would otherwise, if we had all that detail, generate a great deal of repetitive information, possibly render the register less useful and less accessible to citizens by burying the relevant information. I will.
Finlay.
Having read the committee report, I understand the committee rejected thresholds, which I personally think is an error, because that would have meant that incidental lobbying and small-scale lobbying would not be captured. And I wonder if he maybe could elaborate on why the committee rejected those thresholds.
Stevenson.
I think there is an element of judgment in this, presiding officer. There isn't an absolute certainty. But the test of only including people who receive reward for their lobbying is a very simple and objective one. The test of having a threshold, which the committee discussed at some length, is a more difficult one to come up with a watertight definition of. Now, that is something which, as the bill goes forward, I'm sure we can return to at stage 2 and stage 3 and debate further. But I think I'm correct in reporting the committee's considerations in those terms, and that's why we came to the conclusion that we did. But it is a judgment call. It is not an absolute issue. The bottom line is we ask the Government, as the bill moves forward, to find a way to demonstrate that any alteration of the definition of lobbying leaves acceptably modest administrative burdens for those lobbying, while also delivering a useful and accessible register. I take it I have a little flexibility in time, presiding officer.
9 minutes, Mr Stevenson, but there's little flexibility.
Right, thank you, presiding officer. That's helpful. During our inquiry, we looked at the distinction the bill made between paid and unpaid, and we basically endorsed the government's approach. It is right that any citizen can lend their voice to a cause or support an organisation in an unpaid capacity without having to register. And we also agreed that the distinction that's been made elsewhere between professional lobbyists, whatever they are, and in-house lobbyists is not one that we would wish to see echoed here. Under the bill as currently drafted, you would not, for example, be required to register following a meeting with a minister or MSP, provided they initiated the meeting. Now, we understand and accept the rationale behind the exception, which was designed to ensure there are no restraints on MSPs and ministers entering into discourse with stakeholders, experts and representative groups who may have a particular set of skills or knowledge that allows them to make a valuable contribution to policy and otherwise challenge what is proposed. We share the view that MSPs and ministers should be able to have this kind of interaction with specialists without having to go and register. But in practice, we have some concerns. If matters are discussed during a chance meeting or at a dinner or an event, who initiated the meeting and how can that be demonstrated? We think this could be difficult, and we therefore invite the Government to look at this approach and see if there are ways that can offer greater clarity and certainty. When it comes to the subjects of lobbying, we were persuaded by those who gave evidence that the bill's restrictions to MSPs and ministers was too narrow. While we accept the argument that ministers are ultimately responsible for decisions, other office holders are clearly involved in their inception. Importantly, lobbying organisations who spoke to us considered that such interactions to be of equal value to meetings with ministers. Accordingly, we've asked the Government to consider bringing forward amendments to broaden the definition to include communications made to other public officials, such as civil servants, special advisers and senior staff. Finally, we did hear arguments suggesting expenditure should be provided. I come back to the point that this is a matter that Parliament can consider further when we look at the orders we would bring forward after the passage of the bill. Parliament is founded on the principles of openness, accessibility, participation. Get this right, the bill promotes these values, allows everybody to participate in equal footing. We look forward to continuing to work with the Government in any changes it brings forward, and I am happy to say that the committee endorses the view that Parliament should adopt the general principles of the bill.